I'm Sarah Chen, and 3 weeks ago I stood on the steps of the J. Edgar Hoover Building, watching director Amanda Foster pin a commendation medal to my blazer, while cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions. 5 years of being told I was just another face in the crowd, 5 years of watching Marcus Whitfield take credit for my cyber threat discoveries, all leading to this moment. Except Marcus wasn't there to see it. He was in federal custody, and the terrorist attack I'd uncovered and prevented was front-page news with my name finally attached to it. The same attack he'd tried to bury because it threatened his promotion timeline. But what Marcus never knew was that I'd been recording everything, documenting every stolen briefing, every redirected report, building a digital fortress of evidence that would ultimately bring him down and elevate me to the highest recognition in federal law enforcement. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up in Cedar Falls, Iowa, my biggest dream was getting out. Not because I hated the town, but because I knew there was something bigger waiting for me beyond the cornfields and Friday night football games. My mother Linda had always encouraged that dream before cancer took her when I was 16, leaving just me and Dad rattling around our small house above Chen's auto repair. Dad never understood my fascination with computers and technology. To him, real work meant getting your hands dirty, fixing things you could see and touch, solving problems with wrenches and oil changes. Robert Chen had immigrated from Taiwan in the 80s with nothing but determination and a gift for fixing engines. He'd built Chen's auto repair from a single bay operation into the most trusted garage in 3 counties. Customers drove from as far as Des Moines because Dad could diagnose engine problems by sound alone and never charged more than fair market price. It was honest, respected work, and he couldn't understand why his daughter wanted to stare at computer screens all day instead of learning a trade that would always be in demand. The argument started my junior year of high school when I announced I was applying to Iowa State for computer science instead of the community college automotive program Dad had assumed I'd choose. During one particularly heated discussion over dinner, Dad slammed his coffee mug down so hard it cracked the kitchen table we'd inherited from my grandmother. "Sarah, you're chasing fantasies," he said, his voice carrying that tone of frustrated disappointment I'd grown to dread. "This computer stuff, it's a fad. You know what's real? People need their cars fixed. They need mechanics. They don't need another kid playing video games and calling it a career." I tried explaining that cybersecurity wasn't video games, that protecting digital infrastructure was becoming crucial, as everything from power grids to hospitals relied on computer networks. But Dad just shook his head, muttering in Mandarin the way he did when he thought I was being particularly stubborn. "You'll never amount to anything sitting in front of a screen all day," he said finally. "Mark my words, Sarah. The real world doesn't work that way." Those words followed me through 4 years at Iowa State, where I threw myself into computer science with the intensity of someone trying to prove a point. I graduated summa cum laude with a specialization in cybersecurity and network forensics, spending countless nights in the computer lab analyzing malware samples and studying attack vectors. My professors praised my intuitive understanding of how hackers thought, my ability to anticipate vulnerabilities before they were exploited. Dr. Patricia Wong, my cybersecurity professor, pulled me aside after my senior capstone presentation on advanced persistent threats. "Sarah, you have a gift for this," she said. "Have you considered federal work? The government desperately needs people who can think like attackers to defend against them." That conversation led to an interview with CyberGuard Solutions, a major contractor providing cybersecurity services to multiple federal agencies. The company's sleek Arlington office was everything Cedar Falls wasn't. Fast-paced, technology-focused, filled with brilliant minds working on problems that could affect national security. During my final interview, the hiring manager explained that CyberGuard handled threat analysis for everything from Department of Defense networks to critical infrastructure protection. "We need analysts who can spot patterns others miss," she explained. "People who can dive deep into data and surface threats before they become incidents. Based on your academic work and recommendations, we think you might be exactly what we're looking for." I called Dad that night to share the news about the job offer. His response was predictably lukewarm. "Government contractor, huh?" he said, and I could hear the skepticism in his voice. "Sounds like a fancy name for someone who pushes papers around all day. What happens when the next budget cut comes? At least with the trade, you've got skills people will always need. But I'd made my choice. 3 months after graduation, I packed everything I owned into my Honda Civic and drove east to Virginia, ready to prove that staring at computer screens could be just as valuable as turning wrenches. CyberGuard's headquarters occupied 15 floors of a glass and steel tower in Arlington, with different levels requiring different security clearances. My new employee badge got me access to floors 3 through 7, where most of the junior analysts worked. The lobby featured walls covered with commendations from various federal agencies, photos of CyberGuard executives shaking hands with senators and cabinet secretaries, and a digital display constantly cycling through news headlines about cyber threats and defensive victories. During orientation, I learned that CyberGuard employed over 3,000 people across multiple locations, providing everything from basic network monitoring to advanced threat hunting for clients ranging from small federal offices to the Pentagon. The company culture emphasized rapid response, innovative thinking, and what they called proactive defense, finding threats before they found you. My supervisor, Janet Phillips, was a 20-year veteran of both military intelligence and private sector cybersecurity. She had the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd seen every type of cyber attack imaginable and lived to tell about it. Janet assigned me to the Advanced Threat Analysis team, explaining that my job would involve sifting through massive amounts of network data looking for signs of sophisticated attackers. Most threats announced themselves pretty clearly, Janet explained during my first week. Script kiddies, opportunistic malware, phishing campaigns, they're noisy and relatively easy to spot. What we're hunting for are the quiet ones. State-sponsored groups, terrorist organizations, criminal syndicates with serious technical capabilities. They know how to hide, how to blend in with normal network traffic. Finding them requires patience, intuition, and the ability to recognize patterns that don't quite fit. My workspace was a corner desk on the 5th floor, surrounded by 3 monitors and enough processing power to analyze terabytes of network logs in real time. The work was exactly what I'd hoped for: intellectually challenging, constantly evolving, and genuinely important. Every day brought new data streams to analyze, new attack signatures to understand, new threats to investigate. Within my first month, I'd already identified 2 previously unknown malware variants and helped trace a series of probing attacks back to their source. Janet seemed pleased with my progress, noting in my monthly review that I had exceptional pattern recognition abilities and the kind of analytical mindset we need more of. But it was during my 2nd month that I first encountered Marcus Whitfield, and everything began to change. Marcus was the Senior Director of Threat Intelligence, a position that put him in charge of multiple analysis teams and gave him direct access to executive leadership. Tall, impeccably dressed, and possessed of the kind of commanding presence that filled conference rooms, Marcus had built his reputation on several high-profile threat discoveries that had earned CyberGuard significant recognition from federal clients. I first met him during a department-wide briefing on emerging threats. Marcus stood at the front of the auditorium, presenting quarterly statistics on attack volumes and defensive successes. His delivery was polished and confident, peppered with references to classified briefings and private conversations with federal officials. After the presentation, he made a point of walking through the audience, shaking hands and asking about current projects. When he reached my desk area, Marcus paused to review the threat analysis reports I'd been working on. He spent several minutes reading through my findings on a potential advanced persistent threat I'd been tracking across multiple client networks. "Interesting work, Sarah," he said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made people pay attention. "This APT signature you've identified shows real sophistication. Have you briefed this up the chain yet?" I explained that I'd been working with Janet to verify my findings before presenting them to leadership. Marcus nodded approvingly. "Good instincts. We can't afford false positives when we're dealing with potential state-sponsored threats. Keep me informed as this develops. This kind of discovery could be exactly what we need to demonstrate our value to federal clients." I left that interaction feeling energized and validated. The senior director himself had taken interest in my work, recognizing the significance of what I'd uncovered. It felt like confirmation that I'd made the right choice leaving Cedar Falls, that the skills I'd developed were genuinely valuable. Over the following weeks, Marcus began stopping by my workspace regularly, asking detailed questions about my analysis methods and the threats I was tracking. He seemed genuinely interested in understanding not just what I'd found, but how I'd found it. During one conversation, he asked me to walk him through my entire analytical process, from initial data ingestion through final threat assessment. "Your approach is refreshingly systematic," he commented after I'd explained my methodology. "Most analysts get caught up in chasing individual indicators. You're looking at the bigger picture, understanding how different attack vectors connect. That's exactly the kind of thinking that leads to breakthrough discoveries." The validation felt incredible. Here was someone with access to the highest levels of government, someone whose own discoveries had been briefed to cabinet-level officials, telling me that my work showed real promise. When Marcus suggested that I begin copying him on my significant findings so he could provide strategic guidance, it seemed like a natural progression. I also began building relationships with other team members who would become crucial allies in the months ahead. Jake Morrison worked 2 desks over from mine, a quiet analyst who'd been with CyberGuard for 3 years. Jake had a reputation for being methodical and thorough, someone who caught details others missed. During lunch conversations, he shared insights about company politics and advised me on navigating the sometimes complex dynamics between different teams. "Just keep your head down and do good work," Jake advised during one of our early conversations. "CyberGuard rewards results, but you have to be patient. Some people try to rush their way up the ladder and end up making enemies instead of allies." Lisa Rodriguez became another important mentor. As a senior forensics analyst, Lisa had worked on some of CyberGuard's most high-profile investigations, including several cases that had resulted in criminal prosecutions. She had a gift for explaining complex technical concepts in ways that both technical and non-technical audiences could understand, a skill that had made her invaluable during congressional briefings and media interviews. Lisa took me under her wing early, inviting me to observe forensics processes and explaining how different types of evidence could be preserved and presented. "The technical discovery is only half the battle," she explained. "You also have to be able to communicate what you've found in ways that decision-makers can understand and act on." Tommy Park from Human Resources also proved to be an unexpected source of guidance. During a routine check-in meeting, Tommy pulled me aside to offer some friendly advice about corporate navigation. "You're doing great work, Sarah," he said, lowering his voice even though we were alone in his office. "Just remember that in a company this size..." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Perception can be as important as performance. Document your contributions, maintain good relationships with colleagues, and don't be afraid to advocate for yourself when recognition opportunities arise. At the time, his advice seemed overly cautious. I was focused on the work itself, on developing my skills, and contributing to CyberGuard's mission. The idea that I might need to actively protect my contributions or advocate for recognition seemed premature. I was still in my first 6 months, still proving myself, still learning the ropes. Looking back, I realized Tommy was trying to warn me about patterns he'd observed before, situations where talented employees had seen their contributions overshadowed or redirected. But I was too excited about the work, too confident in the merit-based culture I thought CyberGuard represented, to recognize the warning signs that were already beginning to appear. The first red flag should have been how Marcus began discussing my discoveries in team meetings. Initially, he would reference, quote, Sarah's excellent analysis, or findings developed by our junior analyst team. But gradually, the attribution became more generic. He would present my threat assessments as intelligence our team has developed, or discoveries that demonstrate our department's capabilities. When I mentioned this to Jake during lunch one day, he paused mid-bite of his sandwich and gave me a look I couldn't quite interpret. "Marcus has been with the company for 8 years, Jake said carefully. He's built his reputation on high-visibility discoveries. Sometimes senior leadership presents team findings as departmental achievements rather than individual contributions." There was something in Jake's tone that suggested he wanted to say more. but he seemed to think better of it. Instead, he changed the subject to weekend plans and upcoming project deadlines. Lisa Rodriguez was more direct when I raised similar concerns with her. We were working late one evening, analyzing network logs from a potential intrusion, when I mentioned feeling uncertain about how my contributions were being presented to executive leadership. "Trust your instincts, Sarah," Lisa said without looking up from her workstation. "In this business, your discoveries are your reputation. If something doesn't feel right about how your work is being attributed, pay attention to that feeling." She turned to face me directly. "Document everything. Keep copies of your analysis reports, email threads, presentation materials. Not because you expect problems, but because good documentation is always valuable." The advice seemed prudent, so I began maintaining more detailed records of my work. I created encrypted backups of all analysis reports, saved email correspondence related to my discoveries, and started keeping a digital journal documenting my investigative processes and findings. What I didn't realize was that Marcus Whitfield had been systematically building his career on exactly this type of appropriation, and that my growing reputation as a talented threat analyst was making me his next target. The sophisticated cyber attack I was about to uncover would become the battlefield where our conflict would ultimately be decided, with consequences that would reach all the way to the highest levels of federal law enforcement. The breakthrough that would change everything came on a Tuesday morning in October, when I noticed something in the network traffic that shouldn't have been there. The anomaly appeared at 9:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, buried in routine network traffic from a mid-sized regional bank in Phoenix. Most analysts would have dismissed it as normal administrative activity, but something about the data transfer patterns triggered my instincts. The packets were moving in a rhythm that felt too deliberate, too structured to be coincidental. I flagged the traffic for deeper analysis and began what would become the most important investigation of my career. The initial data showed what appeared to be standard banking operations, customer transactions flowing through encrypted channels, nothing that would raise immediate alarms. But when I stripped away the surface layer and examined the underlying packet structures, a different picture emerged. Hidden within legitimate banking data were tiny fragments of additional information, microscopic data bursts that served no apparent financial purpose. Someone was using the bank's transaction network as a covert communication channel. I spent the next 3 days methodically reconstructing these hidden messages, working through lunch breaks and staying late into the evening. The fragments were encrypted using military-grade algorithms, suggesting sophistication far beyond typical cybercriminal operations. As I slowly decoded portions of the communications, my excitement grew into something approaching alarm. These weren't financial crimes or identity theft schemes. The intercepted messages contained references to infrastructure targets, coordination timestamps, and coded language that suggested operational planning for something catastrophic. By Friday afternoon, I had assembled enough decoded communications to understand the scope of what I'd uncovered. A well-organized terrorist cell was using compromised banking networks across 12 states to coordinate a multi-target attack on critical infrastructure. The communications referenced power grid substations, water treatment facilities, and transportation hubs. Based on the timestamps and coordination details, the attacks were scheduled to begin within 6 weeks, timed to coincide with a major federal holiday when emergency response capabilities would be reduced. I immediately documented my findings in a comprehensive threat assessment report, detailing the discovery methodology, decoded communications, target analysis, and recommended response protocols. The evidence was overwhelming and terrifying. If these attacks succeeded, they could cripple infrastructure across multiple states, potentially causing hundreds of casualties and billions in economic damage. This wasn't just a cybersecurity issue anymore. It was a matter of national security. Janet Phillips reviewed my report that Friday evening, her expression growing increasingly grave as she absorbed the implications of my discovery. After an hour of questioning my analysis methods and verifying my conclusions, she leaned back in her chair and shook her head in amazement. "Sarah, this is extraordinary work," she said, her voice carrying a weight I hadn't heard before. "If your analysis is correct, and I believe it is, you've potentially prevented a catastrophic terrorist attack. This needs to go up the chain immediately." She promised to brief the discovery to senior leadership first thing Monday morning, emphasizing the urgent timeline and the need for immediate federal coordination. I spent the weekend feeling a mixture of pride and anxiety, knowing that my discovery would soon reach the highest levels of government and potentially trigger a massive federal response. Monday morning brought disappointing news. Janet informed me that Marcus Whitfield had requested to personally handle the briefing to executive leadership, given the sensitive nature of the discovery and its potential impact on CyberGuard's federal relationships. While I would receive full credit in internal documentation, Marcus would serve as the primary liaison with federal agencies due to his existing relationships and security clearances. I understand your disappointment, Janet said when she saw my expression. But Marcus has direct access to FBI and Homeland Security leadership. He can get this information to the right people faster than going through normal channels. Time is critical here. The logic seemed reasonable, even if it felt personally frustrating. The important thing was stopping the attacks, not who received recognition for the discovery. Marcus scheduled a meeting with me that afternoon to review all aspects of my analysis, asking detailed questions about methodology, evidence quality, and confidence levels. He seemed genuinely impressed by the thoroughness of my investigation. This is exactly the kind of breakthrough discovery that demonstrates CyberGuard's value to federal clients, Marcus said as he reviewed my documentation. You've done exceptional work here, Sarah. I want you to know that your contribution will be fully recognized in all appropriate forums. Over the following days, Marcus began taking the lead on all aspects of the terrorist threat response. He briefed executive leadership, coordinated with federal agencies, and served as CyberGuard's primary point of contact for the expanding investigation. I was gradually moved into a supporting role, providing technical details when requested but excluded from strategic planning sessions and high-level briefings. The exclusion became more pronounced as the federal response intensified. FBI and Homeland Security teams arrived at CyberGuard headquarters, setting up a temporary command center on the 8th floor, where the most senior analysts worked alongside federal agents. Marcus was granted immediate access to these operations, while I remained on the 5th floor, monitoring routine network traffic and waiting for updates through normal channels. Jake Morrison noticed the shift before I fully understood its implications. During lunch one Wednesday, he asked how I was feeling about the federal coordination efforts. It must be exciting to see your discovery become such a high-priority operation, he said. But his tone suggested he suspected something was wrong. I explained my frustration with being sidelined from the investigation I had initiated, despite Marcus's assurances that my contributions were being recognized appropriately. Jake listened carefully, occasionally asking questions about specific interactions and communications. Sarah, this might be a sensitive question, he said finally, but in these federal briefings and coordination meetings, how is your discovery being presented? Are you being identified as the primary analyst? The question made me realize I had no direct knowledge of how my work was being characterized to federal agencies. All my information about the federal response was coming through Marcus or other senior leadership. I had assumed my role as the discovering analyst was being communicated appropriately, but I had no verification of that assumption. That evening, I reached out to Lisa Rodriguez, asking if she had any insight into the federal coordination efforts, or how the threat discovery was being presented to external agencies. Lisa suggested we meet for coffee the next morning at a location away from CyberGuard offices. I've been watching this situation develop, Lisa said once we were seated in a quiet corner of a Starbucks several miles from headquarters. I have some concerns about how your contributions are being characterized. She explained that through her contacts in federal law enforcement, she had learned that the terrorist threat briefings were presenting Marcus as the primary discovering analyst, with minimal reference to supporting team members. According to Lisa's sources, federal agencies understood Marcus to be the brilliant investigator who had uncovered the plot through innovative analysis techniques. This isn't unusual in our industry, Lisa continued. Senior managers often serve as the face of major discoveries, especially when dealing with federal clients who prefer established relationships. But in this case, the attribution seems to be going beyond normal representation. The conversation left me feeling uncertain about how to respond. On one hand, the most important objective was preventing the terrorist attacks, which appeared to be proceeding successfully regardless of attribution issues. On the other hand, My career and professional reputation were being fundamentally impacted by how this discovery was presented to the broader cybersecurity community. Lisa offered practical advice about documentation and evidence preservation, suggesting that I maintain detailed records of my investigative process and communications related to the discovery. Not because you expect problems, she said, but because accurate attribution might become important later, especially if this case results in prosecutions or congressional hearings. Following her guidance, I began systematically documenting my role in the terrorist threat discovery. I created encrypted backups of all analysis reports, saved email correspondence showing the timeline of my investigation, and compiled evidence demonstrating my unique methodological approach to uncovering the hidden communications. I also began keeping a detailed digital journal documenting interactions with Marcus and other senior leadership regarding the case. 2 weeks into the federal response, I learned that Marcus had been invited to brief senior FBI leadership about the threat discovery and ongoing investigation. The briefing would take place at FBI headquarters, with Marcus presenting CyberGuard's analysis to a room full of federal executives and senior agents. It represented exactly the kind of high-visibility opportunity that could define a career in cybersecurity. I asked Janet if there was any possibility of participating in the FBI briefing, either as a presenter or technical expert. Her response was diplomatically disappointing. Marcus will be representing the entire analysis team, she explained. FBI briefings typically involve only the most senior personnel from contractor organizations, but your technical contributions will certainly be referenced in the presentation materials. The next day, Marcus stopped by my workspace to inform me that he would be presenting my analysis methodology and findings to FBI leadership. He asked me to prepare a comprehensive technical summary that he could reference during the briefing, emphasizing the importance of accuracy and completeness. This is a tremendous opportunity to showcase CyberGuard's capabilities to the federal cybersecurity community, Marcus said. Your discovery techniques will be featured prominently in my presentation. This kind of exposure could benefit your career significantly. I spent the weekend preparing detailed technical documentation, creating visual presentations of the threat discovery process, and summarizing the evidence that had led to identification of the terrorist plot. The materials represented months of investigative work, distilled into formats that could be easily understood and presented by someone else. Monday morning brought news that would fundamentally change my perspective on the situation. Tommy Park from Human Resources requested a private meeting, ostensibly for a routine check-in about my integration into CyberGuard culture and career development goals. But once his office door was closed, Tommy's demeanor became more serious. Sarah, I want to discuss something sensitive with you, he began. I've become aware of some concerns regarding attribution and recognition for your recent threat discovery work. Tommy explained that he had received inquiries from federal contacts about the terrorist threat case, specifically about the identity and background of the discovering analyst. During these conversations, he had learned that Marcus was being universally presented as the primary investigator, with no mention of supporting team members or junior analysts. This level of attribution shift is unusual, even for senior manager presentations, Tommy continued. Normally, federal briefings include at least some acknowledgement of the actual discovering analyst, especially for cases of this magnitude. The conversation confirmed my growing suspicions about how my work was being misrepresented to federal agencies. Tommy advised me to maintain detailed documentation of my contributions, and to consider seeking external legal counsel if the attribution issues affected my career prospects. I can't provide specific legal advice, he said, but I can tell you that CyberGuard has policies requiring accurate attribution of analytical contributions, especially for cases involving federal coordination. That afternoon, I decided to take a more direct approach to understanding how my discovery was being presented externally. I contacted Nina Walsh, an employment attorney who specialized in intellectual property and professional recognition issues within the cybersecurity industry. Nina had been recommended by a former Iowa State classmate who had faced similar attribution challenges at a different federal contractor. Nina reviewed the documentation I had compiled, including email threads, analysis reports, and evidence of my investigative methodology. After spending an hour examining the materials, she provided a sobering assessment of the situation. What you're describing appears to be systematic appropriation of professional credit, Nina explained. While your employment contract gives CyberGuard ownership of your analytical work, it doesn't grant the company or individual managers the right to misrepresent authorship or contribution levels. She advised me to continue documenting interactions and communications while preparing for the possibility that more aggressive advocacy might become necessary. The challenge in these cases is that by the time attribution theft becomes obvious, the professional damage has often already occurred. Prevention and early intervention are typically more effective than post-facto correction. The FBI briefing took place on a Thursday morning, with Marcus presenting my terrorist threat analysis to a room full of federal executives and senior agents. I learned about the briefing's content secondhand, through colleagues who had been debriefed by Marcus upon his return to CyberGuard headquarters. According to these accounts, Marcus had presented the threat discovery as the result of his innovative analysis techniques and strategic thinking about terrorist communication methods. He had described the investigation as a months-long effort that he had personally directed, emphasizing his unique insights into how sophisticated threat actors operate within legitimate network infrastructure. The briefing had been extremely well received, with FBI leadership praising Marcus's analytical capabilities and requesting ongoing coordination on related investigations. Marcus had been invited to participate in a federal cybersecurity advisory committee, and CyberGuard had been selected for expanded threat analysis contracts based on the strength of the terrorist plot discovery. When Marcus returned from FBI headquarters, he made a point of visiting my workspace to share positive feedback about the briefing and its implications for CyberGuard's federal relationships. "The FBI was incredibly impressed with our analytical capabilities," he said, his voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who had just achieved a major career milestone. "They specifically praised the innovative methodology we used to uncover the terrorist communications. This success is going to open significant new opportunities for our entire team." I asked whether the FBI had expressed interest in learning more about the specific investigative techniques or working directly with the discovering analyst. Marcus's response was diplomatically evasive. "Federal agencies prefer to work through established senior relationships," he explained. "They appreciate knowing that experienced leadership is overseeing complex investigations. But your technical contributions were certainly highlighted during the briefing." The conversation left me feeling increasingly frustrated and marginalized. My months of investigative work, my breakthrough discovery techniques, my identification of a catastrophic terrorist plot, all of it was being rebranded as Marcus's achievement while I remained relegated to routine network monitoring tasks. That evening, I called my father for the first time in several weeks. I had been avoiding family conversations because I didn't want to explain my growing professional frustrations, especially to someone who had always been skeptical of my career choices. "How's the computer work going?" Dad asked, his tone carrying the same mixture of polite interest and underlying doubt I had grown accustomed to over the years. I found myself describing the terrorist threat discovery in general terms, explaining how I had uncovered a major plot and contributed to a federal investigation. For the first time in our conversations about my work, Dad seemed genuinely impressed. "You helped stop terrorists?" he asked, his voice carrying a note of surprise and pride I rarely heard. "That's serious business, Sarah. That's the kind of work that actually matters." But when I tried to explain my frustrations with attribution and recognition, Dad's response was predictably pragmatic. "Look, kiddo, the important thing is that you did good work and helped protect people," he said. "Don't worry so much about who gets the credit. In the real world, results matter more than recognition." The conversation highlighted how difficult it was to explain the importance of professional attribution to someone outside the industry. Dad viewed work in terms of tangible outcomes rather than career advancement or reputation building. From his perspective, stopping a terrorist attack was inherently valuable, regardless of who received public credit. But I understood that in the cybersecurity industry, professional reputation was everything. The difference between being known as an innovative threat analyst versus a routine network monitor could determine career trajectory, salary progression, and future opportunities. Marcus was systematically destroying my professional reputation while building his own, using my discoveries as stepping stones to federal advisory positions and industry recognition. The situation reached a breaking point 3 weeks after the FBI briefing, when I learned that Marcus had been invited to present the terrorist threat case study at the National Cybersecurity Summit in Las Vegas. The summit was the industry's premier conference, attended by thousands of cybersecurity professionals, federal officials, and technology executives. Marcus's presentation would be featured as a keynote address, highlighting his innovative analysis techniques and successful federal coordination. I requested a meeting with Janet Phillips to discuss my concerns about the attribution issues and the broader pattern of my contributions being minimized. Janet listened sympathetically but seemed reluctant to challenge Marcus's approach to external representation. "I understand your frustration, Sarah," she said, "but Marcus has built strong relationships with federal agencies over many years. These relationships are valuable assets for CyberGuard, and they require careful management." When I pressed her about the accuracy of how my contributions were being characterized externally, Janet became more defensive. "The important thing is that CyberGuard is being recognized for excellent analytical capabilities," she said. "Individual attribution is less important than organizational reputation, especially when dealing with federal clients who value institutional relationships." The conversation made clear that internal advocacy was unlikely to resolve the attribution issues. Marcus had the support of senior leadership, established federal relationships, and organizational momentum behind his version of events. Challenging his narrative would require external pressure and irrefutable evidence of the true discovery timeline. That weekend, I made a decision that would ultimately determine the outcome of this conflict. Instead of accepting the marginalization of my contributions, I began developing a strategy to reclaim credit for my discovery and expose the pattern of appropriation that Marcus had been using throughout his career. The terrorist threat I had uncovered was about to become the battlefield where this fight would be decided, with consequences that would reach the highest levels of federal law enforcement. My strategy began with what I called Operation Digital Truth, a systematic campaign to document and preserve evidence of my actual role in the terrorist threat discovery. Working late nights and weekends from my Crystal City apartment, I created an encrypted archive that would serve as my insurance policy against Marcus's continuing appropriation of my work. The archive included time-stamped analysis reports, email chains showing my investigative progression, video recordings of my technical methodology, and witness statements from colleagues who had observed my discovery process firsthand. The first step involved reconstructing the complete timeline of my investigation. I retrieved every email, every file modification, every database query that had been part of uncovering the terrorist communications network. CyberGuard's systems automatically logged user activity for security purposes, creating a digital paper trail that couldn't be falsified or deleted. These logs showed clearly that I had been the sole analyst working on the Phoenix banking anomaly during the critical discovery period, with no involvement from Marcus until after my findings had been documented and reported. Jake Morrison proved invaluable during this evidence-gathering phase. As someone who worked in close proximity to my investigation, he had witnessed the entire discovery process and could provide detailed corroboration of my timeline. During a carefully planned conversation in the parking garage beneath our office building, Jake agreed to provide a written statement documenting what he had observed. "I watched you work on that banking traffic analysis for days," Jake said, speaking quietly despite the empty garage. "Marcus wasn't even aware of your investigation until Janet briefed him on your findings. I remember because he stopped by asking what you were working on so intensively, and I told him you'd found something interesting in financial network data." Jake's statement included specific dates, times, and conversations that established the true sequence of events leading to the terrorist plot discovery. More importantly, he documented several instances where Marcus had publicly presented my analysis techniques as innovations he had developed, including a department meeting where Marcus had described his methodology for hidden communication detection, using the exact approach I had pioneered. Lisa Rodriguez provided even more damaging evidence of Marcus's pattern of appropriation. Through her connections in federal law enforcement, she had learned specific details about how the terrorist threat case was being characterized in FBI reports and congressional briefings. According to her sources, Marcus was being credited not only as the discovering analyst, but as the architect of innovative investigation techniques that were now being adopted by other federal agencies. This goes beyond normal senior manager representation, Lisa explained during one of our covert meetings at a coffee shop in Georgetown. Federal reports are specifically attributing analytical innovations to Marcus personally, describing techniques that I watched you develop from scratch. She provided copies of federal briefing summaries that referenced Marcus's groundbreaking approach to covert communication detection and his exceptional analytical capabilities in identifying terrorist coordination networks. The language was specific enough to establish that Marcus wasn't just taking credit for discovering the plot, but for inventing the entire investigative methodology that had made the discovery possible. Tommy Park from Human Resources became an unexpected ally in documenting the broader pattern of Marcus's behavior. During a seemingly routine employee satisfaction survey, Tommy asked probing questions about recognition practices and attribution policies within our department. His questions suggested that he was building a case file about potential workplace violations. I've received several informal complaints about recognition practices in your department, Tommy confided during a private meeting. While I can't discuss specific cases, I can tell you that accurate attribution of analytical contributions is both a policy requirement and a legal obligation for federal contractors. Tommy provided me with copies of CyberGuard's official policies regarding intellectual property attribution and employee recognition. The policies clearly stated that analytical discoveries must be accurately attributed to their actual developers, with senior management serving as representatives rather than inventors. Marcus's presentation of my terrorist plot discovery violated multiple company policies and potentially created legal liability for CyberGuard. The evidence-gathering process also revealed disturbing information about Marcus's treatment of previous analysts. Through carefully worded inquiries, I learned about David Kim, a former CyberGuard analyst who had left the company abruptly 2 years earlier. David had developed an innovative approach to detecting insider threats that had been highly successful in identifying potential security breaches within client organizations. I managed to contact David through LinkedIn, and we arranged to meet at a restaurant in downtown D.C., where he could speak freely about his experiences. David's story was remarkably similar to mine, involving systematic appropriation of his analytical innovations by Marcus over a period of several months. I developed a machine learning algorithm for behavioral anomaly detection, David explained. It was revolutionary at the time, something that could identify potential insider threats weeks before they acted. Marcus gradually took control of the project, presenting my algorithm as something he had conceptualized and directed me to implement. David described how Marcus had used his insider threat detection system to secure a major Department of Defense contract, presenting himself as the innovative analyst who had solved a critical security challenge. The contract had been worth millions of dollars and had established Marcus as a leading expert in insider threat detection, launching his rise to senior management. I tried to fight it internally, David continued, but Marcus had been building relationships with federal clients for years. When it came down to his word against mine, the company chose to protect their federal partnerships rather than acknowledge a junior analyst's contributions. David eventually left CyberGuard when it became clear that his career prospects had been permanently damaged by the attribution theft. He now worked for a smaller cybersecurity firm, where his contributions were properly recognized, but he had lost years of career advancement and professional reputation building. The conversation with David crystallized my understanding of Marcus's systematic approach to appropriating innovative work from junior analysts. This wasn't an isolated incident or a misunderstanding about proper attribution practices. Marcus had built his entire career by identifying talented analysts, allowing them to develop breakthrough techniques, and then claiming credit for their innovations in federal briefings and industry presentations. Armed with this broader context, I began developing a more sophisticated counter-strategy. Simply documenting my own contributions wouldn't be sufficient if Marcus had successfully established a pattern of this behavior over multiple years. I needed to expose the entire system of appropriation while simultaneously reclaiming credit for my terrorist plot discovery. Nina Walsh, my employment attorney, proved instrumental in developing this expanded approach. During our second meeting, she reviewed the evidence I had gathered about both my case and David Kim's experience. Her assessment was grimly encouraging. What you're describing appears to be systematic fraud in federal contracting, Nina explained. If Marcus has been misrepresenting the source of analytical innovations to federal clients, he's potentially committed serious violations of contracting regulations and professional standards. Nina advised me to document everything while preparing for multiple potential outcomes. The evidence could support internal company complaints, federal contracting violation reports, professional ethics charges, or even potential legal action depending on how CyberGuard and federal agencies responded to the revelations. The key is building an irrefutable case before making any public accusations, she continued. Once you challenge someone with Marcus's level of federal connections, you need to be prepared for significant retaliation and institutional resistance. Following Nina's guidance, I began expanding my evidence archive to include communications that established Marcus's knowledge of the true attribution for various discoveries. I needed to prove not only that he had taken credit for my work, but that he had done so knowingly and deliberately. The breakthrough came when I discovered email communications between Marcus and federal agency contacts that had been automatically archived in CyberGuard's backup systems. As a senior manager, Marcus's external communications were subject to company monitoring and retention policies designed to protect against security breaches and compliance violations. These archived emails revealed the true extent of Marcus's deception. In communications with FBI and Homeland Security officials, Marcus had explicitly claimed to have personally developed the analysis techniques that uncovered the terrorist plot. He described his quote, years of research into covert communication methods, and his, quote, detecting hidden command and control channels. Most damaging were emails where Marcus provided technical details about the investigation methodology, describing processes and insights that came directly from my documented analysis reports. He had essentially copied my investigative narrative and presented it as his own intellectual development, complete with specific technical details that proved he was claiming credit for my innovations. The emails also revealed that Marcus had been invited to join a federal cybersecurity advisory committee based specifically on his supposed expertise in detecting terrorist communication networks. The committee position came with significant prestige, federal clearance upgrades, and opportunities to influence national cybersecurity policy. Marcus was building his entire career trajectory on the foundation of my stolen discovery. I also found communications where Marcus discussed potential book deals and speaking engagements related to his terrorism detection expertise. Publishers and conference organizers were interested in his story of uncovering a major terrorist plot through innovative analysis techniques. Marcus was literally planning to profit financially from presenting my work as his own intellectual property. The evidence was overwhelming and irrefutable. I had documented not only the true timeline of the terrorist plot discovery, but Marcus's deliberate and systematic appropriation of credit for innovations he had no role in developing. The archive now included witness statements, technical documentation, email communications, system logs, and testimony from previous victims of his appropriation strategy. But gathering evidence was only the first phase of my counterattack. The more challenging aspect involved determining how to expose Marcus's fraud in a way that would restore proper attribution while minimizing potential retaliation. Marcus had powerful allies in federal agencies and senior CyberGuard leadership. Challenging him directly could result in career destruction if the institutional response favored protecting established relationships over acknowledging accurate attribution. Kevin Torres, an investigative journalist who specialized in federal contracting issues, became a crucial ally in developing the exposure strategy. Kevin had written extensively about fraud and misconduct in the cybersecurity industry, with several of his articles leading to congressional investigations and policy changes. I contacted Kevin through an encrypted communication channel, providing him with selected portions of my evidence archive along with background context about the attribution theft. Kevin was immediately interested in the story, recognizing both its newsworthiness and its broader implications for accountability in federal contracting. This is exactly the kind of systematic fraud that damages public trust in government cybersecurity capabilities, Kevin explained during our first meeting at a secure location outside Washington. If federal agencies are making critical security decisions based on falsified expertise, it creates genuine national security risks. Kevin agreed to investigate the story while maintaining my anonymity until I was ready to go public with my accusations. His investigation would provide independent verification of my claims while building additional evidence through federal agency sources and industry contacts. The next phase of my strategy involved preparing for the National Cybersecurity Summit, where Marcus was scheduled to present his keynote address about the terrorist plot discovery. The summit represented the perfect opportunity to expose his fraud in front of the entire cybersecurity community, but it also carried enormous risks if the exposure attempt failed or was suppressed by conference organizers. I began developing what I called the Digital Phoenix Protocol, a comprehensive plan for simultaneously releasing evidence through multiple channels, while ensuring that the truth about the terrorist plot discovery could not be suppressed or ignored. The protocol included timed release of evidence to journalists, federal oversight agencies, and industry watchdog organizations, creating multiple pressure points that would be difficult for Marcus or CyberGuard to contain. The protocol also included a technical component that would allow me to demonstrate my actual role in the terrorist plot discovery using irrefutable digital evidence. I prepared a presentation that could walk through my entire investigative methodology, showing exactly how I had identified the hidden terrorist communications and decoded their operational planning. As the National Cybersecurity Summit approached, I finalized preparations for what would become the most decisive confrontation of my career. Marcus was planning to present my discovery as the culmination of his innovative analytical expertise, unaware that I had spent months building an evidence archive that would expose his fraud to the entire cybersecurity community. The summit would determine whether truth and accurate attribution could triumph over institutional power and established relationships. Everything I had worked for, both in uncovering the terrorist plot and in building my cybersecurity career, would be decided during those crucial few days in Las Vegas. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up.